At 3 a.m., deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean, three exhausted men stood inches away from starting a nuclear war without knowing if their country still existed. In October 1962, the world teetered on the edge of annihilation during what would become known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. To most Americans, the story is remembered through grainy photographs of missile sites in Cuba, tense speeches by President John F. Kennedy, and the phrase 13 days repeated in history books. But far from Washington and Havana, in the lightless depths of the sea, an almost forgotten incident unfolded that could have erased modern civilization in minutes. As the United States discovered Soviet nuclear missiles secretly installed in Cuba, President Kennedy ordered a naval blockade, carefully labeled a quarantine, to prevent further Soviet shipments. American warships spread across the Caribbean, stopping and searching vessels, while both superpowers placed their nuclear forces on hair-trigger alert. Unknown to U.S. intelligence at the time, 4 Soviet diesel-powered submarines were already en route to the region. Each carried a nuclear torpedo with destructive power roughly equal to the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. One of these submarines, B-59, slipped silently through the dark waters near the American blockade line. Built for stealth but not comfort, B-59 was never meant to stay submerged for long periods. Its batteries drained quickly, its air grew stale, and temperatures inside the steel hull climbed above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Sailors fainted from heat and exhaustion. Drinking water ran low. Communication with Moscow was nearly impossible once submerged, and for days the crew had no idea what was happening on the surface. Above them, U.S. Navy destroyers detected the submarine and began dropping practice depth charges, small explosives intended as warning signals, not weapons. But to the men inside B-59, the explosions felt terrifyingly real. The submarine shook violently. Instruments rattled. Some crew members believed war had already begun. Captain Valentin Savitsky, exhausted and under immense pressure, reached a devastating conclusion. If the Americans were attacking, then the Soviet Union must already be under assault or destroyed. In that moment, deep underwater, cut off from orders, he prepared to arm the nuclear torpedo. Launching it required the agreement of 3 officers. Savitsky gave his approval. The political officer aboard, Ivan Maslenikov, agreed as well. One man stood in the way, Vasily Arkhipov, the flotilla commander and second in command of the submarine. Arkhipov was not an idealist or a pacifist. He was a seasoned naval officer who had survived one of the Soviet Navy's worst disasters, the 1961 nuclear submarine K-19 accident, which exposed its crew to lethal radiation. That experience had taught him the cost of rushed decisions and the thin margin between control and catastrophe.
As voices rose in the control room and sweat dripped onto metal consoles, Arkhipov refused to give his consent. He argued that the explosions were signals, not attacks. He insisted they surface and attempt communication before taking irreversible action. The debate was intense, emotional, and carried out in suffocating heat, with the fate of millions hanging on a single decision. Eventually, Arkhipov prevailed. B-59 surfaced, surrounded by American warships. The U.S. Navy, unaware how close it had come to disaster, observed the submarine and allowed it to withdraw. The nuclear torpedo remained unfired. The submarine limped back to the Soviet Union, its crew physically broken, but unknowingly responsible for preventing nuclear war. The incident remained classified for decades. Arkhipov received no medals, no public recognition, and no gratitude from his superiors. In fact, many Soviet submarine commanders were reprimanded for allowing themselves to be detected at all. Only after the Cold War ended did historians uncover the full truth of how close the world came to catastrophe on that October night. Meanwhile, on land, the Cuban Missile Crisis reached its dramatic conclusion. After secret negotiations, the Soviet Union agreed to remove its missiles from Cuba. In exchange, the United States publicly pledged not to invade the island and quietly agreed to remove American nuclear missiles from Turkey. President Kennedy addressed the nation, presenting the resolution as a triumph of calm leadership and strength under pressure. What the public did not know was how fragile that outcome truly was. The near launch aboard B-59 exposed a terrifying reality. Nuclear war did not depend solely on presidents and generals. It could hinge on the judgment of exhausted officers, faulty communication, and misinterpreted signals. The crisis reshaped American and Soviet thinking forever. Soon after, Both nations installed the Moscow-Washington hotline to allow direct communication between leaders. Nuclear command structures were tightened, and safeguards were introduced to prevent unauthorized launches. For the United States, the Cuban Missile Crisis became a defining lesson in restraint. It influenced generations of policymakers, reinforcing the idea that misunderstanding and escalation, not deliberate aggression, were the greatest dangers of the nuclear age. For historians, the story of Vasily Arkhipov stands as one of the most extraordinary examples of individual responsibility in history. Arkhipov lived quietly until his death in 1998, long before his role was widely known. Today, many historians credit him as the man who saved the world. His story is not one of battlefield heroics or dramatic speeches, but of calm resistance under imaginable pressure, proof that history can turn on a single human decision, made in darkness, far from the eyes of the world. In an age when nuclear weapons still exist and global tensions continue to rise, the lesson of October 1962 remains chillingly relevant. The world survived not because systems worked perfectly, but because one man chose patience over panic, and that fragile truth may be the most astonishing historical fact of all.